Well, welcome to our conversation. My name is Rey Saldaña, President and CEO of Communities in Schools. And today's conversation is very important to me for a number of reasons, but I want to call one of them out from the get-go, which is that today's conversation is important because as a Latino leader and one of only a handful leading a national organization with as much reach and impact as CIS, especially in the Latino community for the students and the student population that we serve, I find myself deeply and personally connected, of course, to this work, not only as an alumni of CIS, but also as a product of immigrant parents and the legacy that helped me navigate an educational system that presented myself and other students and others still today, especially with the onset of school closures and the pandemic and public health crisis, with so many hurdles and challenges along the way. And today's conversation, I'm excited that I get to engage with Congressman Joaquin Castro, who is somebody I've known for a great deal of my life. I've known in my own moment of public service as somebody I've looked up to as a model, and to really talk just today about our shared history as well as just our respective work and this platform that we each have to create a more equitable environment for current and future generations. And so the best way I thought to just kick off, I know that bios are only a Google search away. Congressman Castro, he's represented my hometown of San Antonio since 2013 in the House of Representatives, where he serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the House Committee on Education and Labor, and also sits on the Higher Education and Workforce Investment Subcommittee. So before joining Congress, he was also a member of the Texas House of Representatives, where I got to know Representative Castro. But I want to just take a quick point of personal privilege because I want to bring up something that is incredibly important to me right now, because I am also the father to my young son Eli and my daughter Olivia Grace. But my son Eli and I get book time in the evening, and we got our hands on a book called Small Room, Big Dreams, which was written by Monica Brown about Representative Castro and his brother Julian Castro, who was mayor of the city, then HUD secretary. And it's a great book for a number of reasons, but it's also great because of the representation that it presents to somebody like my son and many others who are looking to, whether it's a medium like a children's book or looking on to television or to movie programs or to music, where we can see ourselves. Representative Castro, I just want you to know we've been really excited to get to, of course, read the history and read your story. And I was thinking through, because the book even talks about your grandmother, Victoria, who was an immigrant and came here with this spirit of, as it talks about in the book, and as you've talked about in the past, hard work and just this yearning to overcome obstacles and barriers and adversity. So I was thinking about that spirit that she left with you and your brother, of hard work, of activism that you got from your mother, and of course, the spirit and the support of education. So with that, I thought I'd just kind of jump in and let the audience get to know you a little bit more. So can you just tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how that story and who you are impacted your own educational experience?
Yeah, well, I trust that the book has put your son to sleep a few times at least. It's, first of all, it's great to be with you, man. My brother and I first met you when you were still in college, and you've come an incredibly long way, and y'all are doing great things over there at CIS. So thank you for all your work. And you mentioned my grandmother. My grandmother, Victoria, was the first person in our family to come to the United States from Mexico, and almost 100 years ago now, actually. Next year will be 100 years. But my grandmother came when she was about 6 or 7 years old, and she obviously didn't speak English. She came as an orphan because both her parents had died in Mexico. And my grandmother never made it past elementary school. And so she worked her whole life and, big part of her childhood, obviously most of her adulthood, as a maid, a babysitter, and a cook. And so it was my mom that was the first person in her family to go to college. And also, for my brother and I, what would affect us later in our lives or influence us was my mom was the first one to get involved in politics and really get active in the 1960s and the 1970s. And that's how my brother and I, watching my mom and my dad, got involved in politics. But you're right, it started with our grandmother, who was an immigrant and an orphan from Mexico at 6 or 7 years old.
And I'm thinking through, of course, I know a little bit about you and what you're passionate about, and I know you've talked a great deal about what it looks like to not just reach success in a personal level, but make sure you're bringing up others along the way. And you have had a lot of initiatives that focus on education, the Trailblazers program that talks through what it looks like to have students who have never been to a college campus or don't know what it's like. I wonder if you'll talk a little bit about your own experience, your own educational journey, and the folks that helped you along the way. As you probably know, at Communities in Schools, what we do is we work on ensuring that there is somebody inside the school connecting on a one-on-one relationship with students who may be struggling with barriers or with access or just gaps in the knowledge that they need to write their own success story. So maybe if you'll think about who was part of your own journey, your own educational success.
Yeah, well, I was fortunate to have some great teachers along the way. I went to public school every year except for 1 year. My brother and I went to Catholic school for fifth grade in downtown San Antonio. But other than that, we were in the public schools. And, so we had some great teachers who helped guide us. Our parents as well. Both my parents had actually gone to college. My mom, but also my dad had gone to UT Austin in the early 1960s. And so they were able to help guide us. But we also had classmates that were in different situations where they didn't have the same family support. And so I've seen over the years as a legislator the incredible work that y'all do in helping to guide students as they face challenging times. But I remember even trying to make a decision about what I was going to do after high school was difficult for a bit. Because one of the things that I've worked on and talked a lot about is that in our schools, we haven't been that great about having an infrastructure of support for students in the way that we should, which is why I've always been a big champion of basically outside organizations that are able to provide those support systems in schools. One of those that has been helpful over the years is the College Advising Corps that I'm part of, that I sit on the board of. And what we do is we make sure that there's folks that are offering college advice and guidance to students who are thinking about going to college or want to go to college, but don't necessarily know how to get there in high school. And so I faced a lot of that same doubt and those same issues when I was in, freshman year and beyond in high school.
I want to talk through something. It speaks to, I think, the history of how we got it to a point that, as you comment, the infrastructure is just not there, just not present in current public education systems. And I think we're making strides, and we're talking about really rebuilding, especially this presidential administration, and reimagining what public education can do. Where in the past, perhaps it was just an experience there. This is where you learn about math and language arts and algebra. But much more than that, we know before that learning can begin, you have to ensure that students have the resources that they need, whether that is access to food or stable housing. For many of the students that we serve, some of them may be homeless or dealing with violence or neglect. And it's really this history that has kind of taught us a lesson, which is that public education, in a way, from looking through the history, wasn't always built for all students. And we're saying this specifically in a moment, as we think about whether it was Brown v. Board of Education or instances where immigrants were left out, or the distinction between those who didn't know English and didn't find themselves finding the kind of space with a support system inside schools, that we start thinking about the fact that these very systems are built with some challenges and some barriers in between them. So I wonder how you think about these organizations from the outside coming in, and especially with an eye towards immigrants and those who are coming to these institutions as new, but looking for them as that opportunity.
I just think they're critical, because all of the services that you all provide and other organizations provide are not necessarily built in to the public schools already, or if they are built in, they're not at the scale that you need. And so that's why I'm excited about the Build Back Better Act and the billions of dollars that we will be spending, hopefully, if the Congress passes it, President signs it, that we'll be spending on public educations and programs like this. And with respect to immigrant students, and I thought about this issue recently, with refugees that are coming from Afghanistan, for example, and those kids will be in schools across America soon, and the challenges that they face, very severe at first, just in terms of language, for example, but other barriers as well, because neither they nor their parents, who will be new arrivals to the United States, have ever navigated the US educational system before. And so there are a lot of things, as you know, that are not intuitive for people that you need guidance and help with. And our schools on their own don't always have the resources to do it. And so we need other organizations that provide support to make up for that.
Yeah, I wonder, Congressman, you've had some experience talking through the experience of growing up in the public education system. And as you think about a situation like the one you just described, where students are really looking towards public education as a platform, especially with parents who just don't know how to navigate, what that experience again may have been like for you growing up, or where you saw some folks taking advantage of access points, but really seeing us maybe fall short. And I think it's in that experience that it's how we think about the future of public education being rebuilt in a way that meets all students' needs, even those non-academic, especially in a moment where social, emotional, and mental health are so incredibly important post-COVID.
Yeah, I think that it's just a variety of things. At times, emotional and mental health support. I remember when I was in elementary school, there was a point at which very early on, where both my parents were out of work. And I just remember my anxiety back then, including when I was in school, was just sky high. And then also the support services. We had a church van that was coming and delivering food to us because there was a point where we couldn't afford food. And also our electricity got cut off a few times, I remember. And that's not uncommon for many families in our country, including immigrant families. And so it's making sure that people have something to eat, making sure that they have the support for emotional or mental health issues that they may be dealing with. And then, as I mentioned, when folks get closer to graduating from high school, you got to make sure that you get them there. But as they get closer, really having an infrastructure that will help guide them to their post secondary education plans. And that has not been as robust as it could be. So it's a lot of different challenges. And this will be the Build Back Better Act, the education component of it, will be the most resources and money that we've committed to education in quite some time.
Yeah, frankly, that is something that we are incredibly excited about as a nonprofit organization working inside as partners with public education. What the Department of Education put out during the American Rescue Plan, something close to $130 billion worth to go into schools, and seeing for the very first time language used about how to use those resources in a way that supports students' social, emotional, mental health, and the kind of wraparound student services that students need. And I think one of the critical pieces you talked about was actually having somebody in the school to help navigate a lot of those resources that sometimes exist in a community like San Antonio, or in Houston, or in West Virginia, or in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where we serve, and beyond, that sometimes you frankly, if you've got two parents who are working, or if you have two parents who haven't navigated those, you almost need a PhD to connect all those resources. Yeah. And that's the concept of what we're trying to create. And I know that the president has even talked about supporting the whole student in a community schools model. And we're really excited about that. And I wonder, as you think about the role that elected officials can play in changing the narrative on public education, specifically working to reduce these equity gaps, because I think equity is being built into a lot of the language and the policies. And I just wonder how you're seeing that play out from your perspective, if this truly is a moment from your perspective that we can reimagine in serious ways, because the dollars are there, the language and the rhetoric is there, and just wanted to get your take on it.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is a chance that we're going to have to address equity. I think we have to understand that different students and different people come into our public schools and exist in our public schools with different needs. Some of them need more than others, and we should be able to serve all students and be able to do it well. And, there has been debates for quite a while around funding around public schools and how you fund public schools. In fact, I started school in the district where all of that kicked off in the late 1960s and culminated with a case called SAISD versus Rodriguez, a Supreme Court case, which has been cited by some as one of the worst Supreme Court decisions in our nation's history, because the Supreme Court in that case said that education is not a fundamental right. Fortunately, that was changed by a lot of states under their own state constitutions. But, so there are a lot of different challenges that I think we'll be able to take on if Congress can actually appropriate or pass and then appropriate this money.
I think it's in that way that I want to show a little bit of our gratitude at communities and schools, but also for educators all across the country and those who are listening into this conversation. Because what is true about what I believe is accessible to us in terms of resources is that we get to finally put into practice not just the pilot opportunities of what a group like Communities and Schools and our site coordinators can do, but I'll use an example in San Antonio, where the San Antonio Independent School District has expanded from 20 schools to close to 50 schools with Communities and Schools using the American Rescue Plan dollars. The hope is that this proves out a continuation of what needs to be inside the schools, not just as a nice to have, not just as a pilot, but what can be sustained long term. Because I think there's a statistic that you may speak on, Congressman Castro, that I think should be a call to action, and for a lot of calls to action that we've had over the last year, which is that we now in our public schools have close to 15 million students who are living in poverty. And that is a number that includes close to 53% of all students who are sitting in a public school classroom are now students who are suffering from the effects of poverty. And so we have not caught up, I think, with what is that we need to have and exist inside schools, and that we're finally now getting an opportunity, whether it's the SISD example or growth and expansion in Nevada or in California. We're hoping this takes. And I think, just to get your take on this, I think the biggest threat to that is a short-term memory, that we forget about how difficult life has been for the last year.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And, one of the silver linings, if we can say that there's a silver lining to everything that's happened over the past year and a quarter with all the tragedy, is that it also exposed I think it exposed for everybody some of the real challenges that have been urgent for a while, but that were made very apparent to everyone, and not just members of Congress, but also the American public. The digital divide, for example, people not having access to the internet to get onto their virtual classrooms. The need for greater instruction, for teacher training, assistance, and so forth. And so this will be an opportunity to work on a lot of those things. And really, I think just generally to reinvigorate public schools in America. There are many folks who have wanted to put a big question mark over public schools. And as you know, there's been a big move towards privatization over the decades. And this will be an opportunity, I think, to really reinvigorate public education.
Yeah, thank you for commenting on that. Also, thank you for reminding us about this is one of the history with the landmark Supreme Court case that happened in San Antonio, because we talk a little bit about whether we can rebuild an education that wasn't built for all students. That's a perfect example of where we have made some mistakes and actually gone backwards in ensuring that we support schools for all of the important ways we can build around students who may be dealing with barriers or obstacles or discrimination. And one thing I just want to get, as we close out here, I want to get your take on is how we think about supporting our students even after they leave high school. And you talked a little bit about that handoff or that transition. We at Communities and Schools, our mission is pretty simple. We are trying to surround our students with a community of support to ensure that they achieve in school, but also achieve in life. And we know that those barriers and those obstacles don't end after the high school stage. In fact, we're built into I think students are coming into a world where a high school diploma is just not enough. And I wonder how you think about ensuring that we create the support structures for the students that we serve at Communities and Schools and those who need more support and are going to face barriers after high school.
Well, there absolutely has to be greater integration between and among our different educational systems, the secondary education system or public schools and our higher education system, because if not, people will fall. Many people fall through that gap already. And over the years, there's been, among some at least, a mentality that if we get them through 12th grade and they graduate, then our job is done. And on the higher ed portion, it's like, well, we don't have any responsibility until they walk in our door. But it's important that you serve people, that we get them ready when they're in high school to go on to college or go on to some other post-secondary endeavor. And then once they get to college, again, that if they need developmental education, for example, or whatever it is that folks need, that you do everything that you can to help them succeed. And we can't conflate two things, which I think we've done over the years in secondary education, which is you can't conflate the idea that making sure somebody is college ready actually means that you're putting the resources and the infrastructure in place to guide them to college. Those are two separate things. Being substantively prepared in a certain subject like math or English or writing versus a school having the number of counselors or the resources, the support groups that are necessary to actually, guide those students onto college. And until I think we can close gaps like that, it's going to be tough for us to help some students, a good chunk of students, actually find success and not fall through that crack.
Congressman, I know that we've got just a champion in you who is looking to support ways that we can continue the work of supporting students, especially with outside agencies like communities and schools. And I will just lend you an important talking point around the work and how critical it has been for CIS, which is that through this moment of the pandemic, the concern for us with schools who are oftentimes financially strapped is that what was going to happen with communities and schools when schools were shut down a year ago. But in fact, what we're seeing is that the data has come back that schools are doubling down on what we know works the most with students these days, which is we actually grew from about 2,500 schools to 2,900 schools in the midst of a lot of difficult questions for schools about what can be sustainable long term. But it goes back to the origins of why we exist as an organization at CIS, which is it's not programs that are changing students' lives, it's relationships. And with close to 4,000 site coordinators all across the country, we hope that as this conversation is a timestamp on this moment, that in a few years, we're really talking about expanding the operation into more schools. And it's been with your help and with the support of resources that are coming from the DOE, whether it is through relief dollars or through the ARP. We're excited to see this work just continue and grow and expand.
No, absolutely. Well, y'all do great and necessary work. So much success to you in the coming years.
Well, thank you, Congressman Castro, for the conversation. I'll just leave with one final note, which is that I remember reading once that you and your brother Julian, this is a story that we can sort of both relate. We both went to Stanford. Joaquin is from the west side of San Antonio. I'm from the south side of San Antonio. And there's a story about you and your brother getting to college for the very first time and looking at one another in the airplane, crying because you were leaving and going away from home for the first time. And I think I'd like to joke with you, and I'll share with our audience, that I didn't have anybody's shoulder to cry on when I was going.
But you had it tougher, that's for sure. I had my brother with me at least. No, that's definitely true.
But I'll say all that to say this piece, which is that when I got to the airport, I didn't know anything about how to navigate that, the world of getting through securities or the baggage or check fees or who do you give your ticket to. So I actually called my CIS site coordinator at that time because she was the only person I knew who actually had ever been on a plane and knew what the experience was like. And I'm so grateful that I get to connect that because she was also the person who said, you know what, you need to apply to a school like Stanford beyond what I was even considering. But she knew about the university because she had heard about the two twins, one who was a state representative and the other who was mayor of the city at the time. And so in a lot of ways, this is just a great way that I get to share this conversation, this time with you for a number of reasons. I want to show my gratitude. So thank you for joining this conversation and for being part of the continued support to get to support communities and schools and the journey to be all in for kids.
No, absolutely. Good talking to you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Take care.